You can answer more than once. So what areas or elements do you think must be considered when thinking about safety? Can be anything at all. The area you're using, brilliant start. Thank you for that. So where are you? Are you in? Are you out? What type of surface? Coned areas, good. Making it clear. First aid equipment, potential risks, good. The people in the session, interesting and good answer. I agree with that, definitely. It's not just about what's around you, it's also what's inside and who is in there. Risk assessment of the area, equipment being used, good answers. Medical conditions of children, brilliant answer. The tasks, excellent. So what will they be doing in that session? The needs of the students, so any additional needs, special educational needs, excellent. Another 30 seconds or so for those that have already answered. You can fire something else in as well, should you wish to. What areas or elements do you think must be considered? So we've already had some on the area, the equipment, the people involved. A reaction plan, brilliant. So a plan B, some may know it as. If it's not going according to your plan, do you just leave it and let it snowball, or do you step in and take action? Good answer. Last 15 seconds or so. The sport itself, brilliant. So some sports and activities naturally carry a higher risk level than others. On the flip side to that, some of the lower level risk sports still can be a risk if not done properly. Qualified, excellent answer. So the person delivering, are you suitable for that environment and situation that you are being asked to deliver in? Excellent. If we're talking about Premier specifically and other companies, they will have minimum operating standards that must be met in order to be deployed. Safeguarding qualification and a DBS, excellent. Okay, some good answers to start off there, so thank you for that. I will close that poll down and I will jump back to our slides. So some really good input there. Thank you for those that have done that. It's different areas. It can be the environment, the area that you're using, the surface. It can be the equipment. It can be the people within the session. It can be any additional needs that those people may have. It can be the type of activities that you're using and type of equipment. They may carry a bigger risk. Some reference standards and the person delivering, are you meeting sufficient standards to be deployable into that scenario in the first place? So a really broad range of answers there, and it's good to see different people thinking at different angles and types of things to consider. So a really good start there, thank you for that. So the slides that are going to follow on from here on how to deliver safe sessions, we're going to look at firstly the preparation. So before that session, it can be when you arrive at the venue and it's an hour before the session or half an hour before the session. It can be in the days or the weeks building up to your session. But what preparation must you do before that session runs? And then we're also going to look at strategies during the session. So to deliver a safe session, everything is in place, but then once it's beginning to run, what can you be doing to drive that safety throughout from the start to the end of that session? So, preparation before. We're going to look at risk assessment. So, with a risk assessment, you will have your standard template from your employer, which will be completed on the venue beforehand. So that will happen for every venue you work in, and around every 6 weeks, you will complete a risk assessment on that venue and the surrounding areas and its features. Now, in addition to that risk assessment, you are doing an ongoing risk assessment before the session begins, because if I complete a venue risk assessment before my first session, that's good practice. But then in the time that is then followed on from me completing it to the session day, there could have been something new put into the hall. Something could have been painted, meaning that I can no longer use that area and I've got to use a different area. So you've got to make sure that there's ongoing risk assessment before the session. Within that risk assessment, it's about identifying our potential risks and hazards. So just to be clear, a hazard is something that has the potential to harm you. So in the visual here, as you can see, there is a shark fin in the sea. So the hazard is something that has the potential to harm, whereas a risk is the likelihood of a hazard causing that harm. So we'll put it into context. A hockey stick. You are planning to do a hockey session in a school, at a community club, wherever it may be. Now, a hockey stick naturally is a hazardous piece of equipment that has real potential to harm you or somebody else, whether it be a wooden hockey stick or a plastic hockey stick. If used incorrectly, that can cause some serious harm. What you then put in place and how you action that will then determine the risk level. So if you have got a space, a coned area of 25 children, and we're talking the size of a box on a football pitch, and it's quite cramped, the risk level naturally is going to increase with that hockey stick because of the numbers in the space and the size of the space. However, if your numbers are managed effectively with the space you have available, the risk of that hockey stick may then lower because there's a lot more space given to the children or the participants using that stick. So it's just important that, first of all, we differentiate those differences. The hazard is the something that has potential to harm, but then the risk is the likelihood. You have control of that likelihood to an extent. It's then to consider and plan necessary action to reduce. So again, with that example of the hockey stick, if you have a lot more space available and the numbers are there, you can then spread out accordingly. If the space is not permitted and you are at peak or maximum capacity with your space, you would then need to determine how many sticks are being used. What type of activities will you run with the sticks in order to drive that risk as low as possible? So hopefully that makes sense. If at any point anybody wants to share any thoughts or opinions on that, feel free in the chat box as well. Please let me know. Marley, I've just seen you about the register. I'll come back to that later on. Thanks for letting me know. So with the risk assessment, we're going to break it down into 3 areas. We're going to look at the environment, we're going to look at the equipment, and we're going to look at the people. So this is your ongoing assessment before the session. So the environment, what type of space are you using? Is it indoor, is it outdoor? What's the surface? Is it on the field? Is it a tarmac playground? Is it one of the old-fashioned stone playgrounds that are quite slippy when wet? What type of surface are you working on? Will that have an impact on the activities you run, the intensity in which the children will run or the participants will be moving at? Where are you in comparison to the main building? So I once worked in a school where to use the field, we had to cross a main road, and we were a significant distance from the main building. Now, if I took the children to that field because I didn't want them to miss out and lose out on lovely weather and using a field, if I went alone and didn't prepare for that and there was an incident, I'm by myself and I can't even send any children for support in the main building because it would mean them leaving and going to cross a main public road. So before that session, I knew what the scenario was with regarding the space I wanted to use and the distance from the building. So what I had to do was put things in place. I had to include in my risk assessment what steps I can take to reduce any identified or possible risks. So for that scenario, just so you're aware, we plan to have 2 school staff come over with us, and then we also had a radio device that had a very strong signal, and class teacher was always at the end of that radio, and should we need further assistance with the 2 adults with me, we would radio for help. So they were the things that we put in place because we knew what potential hazards and risks there could have been. Any neighbouring facilities? There was another school I worked in that neighboured a farmer's field that kept horses. Naturally, when we used to come onto the yard, the horses would come to the fence, and some children naturally would want to run over to see the horses and try to pet them. You've got to consider the potential risks and what you can do to combat those risks. Public access, again, there was another, just in case you're wondering, I was an AP myself for over 10 years, worked in a lot of different schools. Public access, there was one field I did use where there were Joe Public walking the dog. Nothing I could do about it, but again, didn't want them to miss out on using the field in nice weather. But I had to put things in place in order to keep the children and the participants and myself and other adults safe at all times. So in that scenario, it was a coned area. I had 2 additional staff with me again, but one of the members of staff, they were sort of briefed on, should anybody get closer to our area with a dog or just having a walk, they will go and have a chat with them just to explain what was happening. So they were the things we put in place. In the environment, are there any fixed structures or equipment? This then links in nicely with movable structures and equipment also. So in a school hall, let's use, what type of things can you expect to see? So if you want to unmute yourself and fire away, what type of things can you see in a school hall? If you want to put it in the chat as well, feel free.
Benches.
Benches, good. So different pieces of apparatus. Thank you for that. Anything else?
The classic sort of gymnastic climbing equipment on the walls.
Yeah, perfect. Climbing equipment and apparatus. Some children, again, just gravitate towards it. Can be a trip hazard. Slippery floor after lunch. Brilliant. You need to be in the hall for 1:05 for your lesson, but they've just mopped up and you found a piece of bread on the floor while you're doing it. Gymnastic
often can have radiators and heaters.
Radiators and heaters, good. In the colder months, they can be on full blast. Again, if children are moving towards those, that can be a hazard. So there's lots of things to think about in a school hall, but also outside. On the yards, some of them now have the metal climbing frames. Some have basketball, football posts. Some may have picnic benches. So there will be things that are fixed and you cannot move them. They're in the ground. They're not going anywhere. You've got to plan around that. And how can you maintain safety in your session with those things not being moved? There may then be movable structures. So somebody mentioned benches, which is a really good answer. If there's an extra bit of space where the benches can be moved to, brilliant. Some schools naturally stack benches one on top of the other, which guidelines are currently, I believe, you're not supposed to stack them. They should be single on the floor. So I would use to take any of the top ones off and put them down, just again to reduce that potential risk of them falling should somebody go near them. Naturally, with coned areas, which we'll go through shortly, they would not be an issue anyway. Desired activities, which somebody mentioned on our Slido chat. So based on the environment you are setting or you have to access, what type of activities can you do? You may be delivering an athletics session, and for some reason you have to use the hall and you wanted to do sprinting. Now, as much as you want to keep up with your program or your scheme of work, first and foremost, paramount, safety. Can we do a successful sprinting session in a small hall? Ideally not. Therefore, you're going to make appropriate changes. Again, somebody mentioned about plan B to accommodate that. And this is all before the session. You're risk assessing ongoing these areas. Finally, for the environment, the weather. So a lot of us are fortunate at the moment. We're getting a lot of sunshine and it's nice and warm. If you are one of the coaches that maybe has a double slot with the class, or it's extremely hot and they're out in the sunshine for up to an hour, making sure that the shade breaks planned in, water bottles are taken, hats if anybody has them. All that is risk assessment. That is safety. That is your duty of care to make sure that those children or participants remain hydrated and do have short breaks in a shaded area to cool off. So all these things are considered with the environment. The equipment, so it's in good working condition and clean. So that can be something from maybe a chip or a crack on a bat, a cricket bat maybe, or a tennis racket. That can then be something a bit more less severe than, let's say, the classic smelly bibs. albeit the smelly bibs don't hold a high risk for cleanliness purposes and passing on of germs. It is also vital and important that participants do have access to fresh, clean bibs and not ones that have done the rounds on the rainy after-school football club for the past 6 months. Is the equipment age appropriate? Now, this is often with some coaches, activity professionals, wanting to demonstrate the best and highest possible standards, which you cannot criticize for. And it's really good that a lot of people have that mentality and attitude. However, you have to consider that for the age of some participants, there are pieces of equipment that aren't suitable or appropriate. So if you are working with early years or foundation, now I'm not saying this is always the case, but if you wanted to do a striking and fielding session to really test how far they've come along, cricket bats and using the ones that the year sixes use, they're not appropriate. So thinking about the age you're working with and the equipment you are thinking about using. Is the equipment in line with any NGB guidelines? So for any football coaches or deliverers, the FA have guidelines on ages of participants and the size footballs that they should be using, and also how much they should be pumped up to. So for any of those sports, it's always worth to do a bit of research on what are their guidelines for equipment and ages and condition, or how well they're pumped up, for example. Is the equipment fit for purpose and suitable for the users? So similar to age appropriate, now it is slightly different. And again, I'm going to draw back to some previous experiences of mine. And when I wrote this comment, immediately a year 5 class of mine from years gone by came into my head. A lovely group, a really nice group of children, a lot of challenges though, a lot of challenges. I never use the word naughty children, but the behaviour was challenging. And if I wasn't keeping it fresh and constant, then I could potentially lose them. Now, in relation to equipment, we were in a position where I wanted to do striking and fielding, net and wall, and all the other topic areas. Now, back to the hockey example, at the time, I knew that if I was to deliver hockey and give them all a stick, even if I spread them out and they had a safety zone or a working area each, it is still a big risk because they weren't ready for that piece of equipment. So what it was about for me was ongoing risk assessment, monitoring, speaking with class teacher, and then giving it to them, telling them what I want to do, but unless the behaviour is there, we cannot use the equipment. So it's something to bear in mind. And you may find that you feel a bit negative doing this, but ultimately you've got to think and be realistic and make sure that everybody would be safe. So sometimes, regardless of age, if you feel a piece of equipment is not suitable, don't use it until you're happy with if it will become suitable. And then finally, space appropriate. So back to the hockey stick scenario, if you're working in a small hall and you've got 30 kids and you want to give them all a hockey stick, is that going to be realistic? Is it going to be safe to use? If not, it may be that you create a carousel of activities where every other activity has a stick and there's only 4 people in each group using a stick. Ways in which you can still get them using the equipment, but it is safe and suitable for the space that you're working in. And then finally, for the ongoing risk assessment, the people. So before the session, any prior knowledge. So we had some people on our slide they mentioned about anyone with additional needs or special educational needs, any persons with a disability. That knowledge you have, use it. And use it so that equipment and environment, it's safe for all involved. Anybody who you know is class teacher told you they're prone to running away. Again, I had children like that over the years. They'd jump the fence and they'd leg it. I need to have a plan in place, not necessarily because it will happen, but in the event it does happen, preempting it happening, what have I got in place? And that's what you have to do. You need to think about and plan for the unexpected. Are they suitably dressed? Jewelry removed, watches for girls with long hair or boys with long hair, have that tied back. If you're doing any sort of climbing, then it is shorts with pumps or agreed footwear or bare feet. So not having long pants on where they potentially become a slip hazard. The numbers in your group, again, the space you have, you need to manage, monitor and manage how you will group them accordingly to give them as much space as possible, albeit space may be a challenge for you. The distance between the groups, if you are grouping them and there is equipment involved, try and leave a sufficient distance between each group so that there's not a potential risk of colliding because they're not paying attention or focusing on the other groups and what they're doing. Are the activities appropriate for the space? Again, we've been through that. So if you plan to do a sprinting session, but you only have the small hall, is that appropriate? Additional adults. If you have a TA or another member of a school staff or an assistant coach, giving them direction. So often when you leave somebody to do their own thing, that can lead to a risk, that can lead to an injury or an incident. So giving them direction, sharing your plan with them, telling them if there's a particular group you want them to work with, is there a particular skill you want them to focus on and reinforce and remain with that group. So giving them direction will reduce any possible risks that they may incur. And then that's the same for yourself. Where are you positioning yourself? Are you in the middle of the session and you're becoming a barrier to the children that they have to move around? Or are you positioning yourself outside the area, but you can still see everything and everyone that's going on? So they're just 3 areas on ongoing risk assessment before your session, in addition to your venue risk assessment, which are completed around every 4 to 6 weeks. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we move on? I'm just conscious it's a lot of talking from me. Time is against us, but we are on track. Anything at all? Okay, that's a good sign. So more preparation before the session is resources for essential practice. The word essential, it's a non-negotiable. Regardless of where you're delivering, who you're delivering to, why you're delivering the session, you need to have these resources and this information to hand, and it cannot be up for discussion. So you need a fully stocked first aid kit. As your supplies start to drop, you've got to replenish them. If you work for an organisation who provides you with that first aid kit, tell them you need it stocking up. If you've told them and it's not occurred straight away before your next session, go out and buy it yourself. Local supermarkets, albeit at this current climate, it's difficult to get to. But in future, you can go to a supermarket, get a box of plasters for 50p, and then tell your employer what you've done, and then they'll reimburse you for it. But don't leave your first aid kit half empty or empty going into your next session. You must take action and keep it fully stocked. You must have incident and injury report forms to hand. So your organisation may provide them. So for Premier Activity Professionals, you have those available. If you're working in a school, they will also have their own. That then feeds into the next point, the company or venue processes. So what is the process if an injury occurs in your session? Is it the Premier template you use, or does school want you to use their template, or do you have to do both templates and fill them in? You take a copy back to your employer, school get a copy as well. You always keep the original, never give out the original. Be aware of any emergency scenarios. You're on the field, you're in the middle of a session, and then the fire alarm goes off and it's not a drill. Do you know where to take the children? Do you have a register to hand, or does an accompanying adult have that register for you to use? All these areas you've got to think about before your session, because if you don't and you're in your session, that is too late. It's too late to act. Have an infrastructure awareness. Who's who? You've identified something in the session or an injury's occurred. Who do you go and refer to? Is it class teacher? Is it a designated member of school staff? Is it your local club? Is there a welfare officer that you refer to? If it's a club where you only have interaction with parents, telling the parents, such a body's had a little fall, there's a bump on the knee, keep an eye on it. Be aware of who you're working with in your channels of communication. And then finally, as we've already discussed, somebody's brought up, which is brilliant to see it once again, information on your participants. Have you got anyone who is asthmatic? Any allergies? Any illnesses? Additional needs? So I am a hay fever sufferer, so it's not severe, but if I have an antihistamine every morning in the summer when I'm working on the field, that is fine for me. Other people, however, they may need additional medication that they may have prescribed. You need to know all these things, so then when you do go out and you're in your session, you are planned should the worst case happen. And unfortunately, it's always thinking about worst case scenario. Are you covered? And some people may say it's overthinking. It's not. For me, that is brilliant preparation. So always be thinking, get information on your participants. Do you have to take their inhalers out with them? And so on. Okay, so that is just some information on before the session. Any questions, any comments? Feel free to put it in the chat box. Feel free to unmute yourself and speak out. Okay, another good sign. We shall move on. So now let's look at the second part of how to deliver a safe session. We've discussed before the session and your risk assessment and other areas that you need to prepare for before that session begins. Now let's think about strategies during the session. So firstly, setting your ground rules. So who does this at the moment? Unmute yourself. What does it look like? In the chat box, tell me what it looks like for you. Do you just do it for the first time you've met your group, or do you do this every week? Do you do this every other week, fortnightly? What do you do to set ground rules?
For me, I'd probably do it definitely first week, and then if I felt like I should, then I'd probably do it again.
Brilliant, thank you for that. So first week, first session, set the precedent. Now it's not to mean be negative and sit them down and give them a telling off for nothing they've even done yet, but it's a case of getting your point across in a positive manner, so then they know what to expect, they know what their boundaries are. So thank you for that. Anyone else? So we've had somebody say have set areas and reinforce every week. Brilliant. So it does no harm to reinforce constantly. Again, the way you pitch that reinforcement is critical. If it comes across negatively, in a negative tone, that can have a negative effect. However, if it comes across in a positive tone, then it can have a positive effect. Anybody else? How they set ground rules at present? So Dan, behaviour agreements if needed, and then reinforce and visible every week. Visible every week, brilliant. So sometimes it may not be verbally telling them, but it may having that visual for them to look at and refer to should you need. Thanks for that, Dan. Savvy, get the group to help set the rules, and then it's their rules. Good strategy. So getting their input, giving them a bit of ownership on their environment and their session, and then agreeing it and adhering to it. Thanks, Savvy. And then an unknown user, introductions and expectations. Good. If they're clear on your expectations, for the majority of your participants, they will do all they can to fulfill that and to achieve that. So making it clear from the start. Good. Identifying and praising good practice for others. So you've just seen a child about to leave the safety zone, for example, but then you stop them, or they stopped and they change direction to keep themselves in. Tell them, well done to John for keeping yourself in the safety zone. Really good practice that you're keeping safe. Other children or other participants will then copy that because they want that praise. And it's no different to us. When we get praised for something, you feel good about yourself. It motivates you to continue to do it. So if we're praising for good practice and being safe, others will follow. My control of football is very poor. I'm not footballing, unfortunately. So if I was ever in a footballing session and my football rolled to the other side of the yard, if somebody picked it up and just gave it back to me, thank them. Thank you for getting the ball back. Really kind of you. It's simple, but it's good practice. And it promotes safety, as opposed to somebody picking the ball up and just absolutely belting it across the yard where it could potentially hit somebody. So really praise and show and identify the good practice of safety. And then finally, for ground rules, immediately react and action. any signs of somebody moving out of areas, any disruption or danger to others, or misuse of equipment. Sometimes you may think that it's quite minor and that it doesn't need bringing up. The method in which you do address it, it could be a one-to-one, just asking the participant to come to the side. I've just noticed you've done this. Just tell me why you think that's not safe. Okay, brilliant. Just remember not to do it again. Rather than shouting across the yard to them and identifying them in front of others and isolating them. So your method is key, but don't let it slip, because minor issues can then snowball to major issues. So make sure you nip things in the bud once they're identified. Again, the method of how you do that is where it will be effective or not. We don't want to humiliate anybody. And a lot of the time, it's just a mistake that somebody may have made. Pull them to one side, not literally, ask them to one side, just talk them through it. Next strategy for the session, or during the session, your effective prep activity or warm-up. Now, some people may think that this isn't sort of suitable or appropriate. However, I believe it is. If your session start does not have the desired effect, you can lose people. So, for example, I'm taking a class of 20 out onto the yard. It's sort of spitting. There is a bit of a rain, there's a bit of a breeze. However, I feel that it is not a high risk and they shouldn't be outside. Now, in that first 5-10 minutes in my prep activity or warm-up, if I am not getting them warm and doing what it says on the tin, and if I'm not getting them engaged, I'm going to lose them. Now, where safety comes in is that if I've lost a group of children because they're too cold, they will continue to stand and do as minimal as possible for the remaining 40 minutes of the session. I will then have to keep going back to them and keep speaking to them, which means that my attention won't be on other children then. So the bigger impact it can have is massive. Whereas in that first 5-10 minutes, if it's something age appropriate, if it's fun, if it gets them moving and it gets them warm, they're more likely to be engaged and continue with the rest of the session. That then has a positive impact on potential safety, and it then also reduces any identified risks. On the flip side, if it is a very warm day, or you're inside a hall or a sports hall and the heating's blasted up to 100 and it is really, really warm, think about that warm-up. If you'd plan to do timed long distance running, you may want to think twice about that. Take the intensity off a bit and do something a bit lighter, getting them prepared, maybe some dynamic stretches. So really think about your environment and getting them engaged in that first physical activity part of the session. The next strategy during the session is your learning style, or your delivery style, sorry, because it does matter. For those who've attended previous webinars of mine, I'm very big on this, albeit in the last couple of sessions I've delivered, the context has been around learning and development. However, the context for the delivery style today is around safety. I'm going to refer back to the Year 5 class that I had. Again, really nice group of children, but a challenge. Now, for those that aren't familiar with delivery styles, does anybody quickly want to share autocratic? What does an autocratic deliverer or session look like?
It's them telling them what they want the group to do.
Good, yeah. You're going to work in this area. You're going to use this ball. You're going to start when I say. You're going to stop when I say. Controlled, which isn't a bad thing, but that is a type of delivery style. Democratic. Anyone want to comment on that?
Asking the learners what they might want to do, give them a bit of responsibility, and asking them questions about what do we want to cover in this session. So pass the ownership over to them. Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. So it's an equal input. So it may be that you say, okay, you're going to work in that session. You're going to work in that area. I'm going to give you this piece of equipment. However, you can pick how you manipulate that equipment, and you can decide when you start and when you stop. Because at that moment in time, you know they are in a position and a place where they will make those correct decisions. And then finally, a laissez-faire approach. So we've gone from being very regimental and command, equal responsibility, to laissez-faire, the other end of the spectrum.
Pretty much just let them discover what they want to do. So allow them to go with the flow, basically.
Good, yeah. So it's me saying 10 minutes, you need to go and prepare, you know what you need to do. Get what your equipment you need, work where you need to work, away you go. So giving them that real ownership on their learning and their development. Now, if we bring it back into safety, thank you to those as well that answered. Bringing it back to safety and back to my year 5 class that came to mind. If I was democratic or if I was laissez-faire in my delivery style to them, chaos. Because at that moment in time when I was working with them, they weren't in a position where they were making rational decisions, where they were working well with each other without the supervision of an adult, which is not a criticism, it's a fact. That's how they were. So I needed to make sure that my delivery style was fit for purpose to keep them safe, first and foremost, and to get the most out of our session. So when you're working with a group, if you know their traits and how they work as a group and as individuals, you need to then provide the appropriate delivery style to accommodate that in order to keep them safe. So before we think about learning styles or delivery styles for development and progress and learning, first and foremost, safety. My year 5s, they needed autocratic. Anything else, it'd have been chaotic. Somebody would have got hurt. So I had to be autocratic for them. So just bear that in mind when you're thinking of your delivery style and who you're working with, because that has big impact and potentially a big risk on the safety of themselves, yourself and others as well. Your positioning. So final few slides now, guys. Appreciate your attention so far. So strategies during the session. Your positioning. Ensure you're scanning the area. Move to different positions. So don't fall into the trap of staying in the same position in the middle and just looking from side to side. Scan the area. Move around the outside, but make sure you can see every participant. Never have your back to any participant. So if you want to intervene with a small group and looking at a skill maybe or talking about rules, yes, you can do that intervention, but make sure you position yourself so your back is to the wall or open space and you can still see every other participant in that session. Okay, turning your back, risk level straight away through the roof. So make sure you're always seeing everyone involved. Finally, for your positioning, be in the session, but not in the session. Now, there's a bit of a myth or an opinion that some coaches believe joining in does help and benefit. Now, what I would say is I never used to join in because the risk it carried, it wasn't worth it. Now, naturally, different environments and contexts may apply. A footballing coach or a netball coach in a club, you may be able to demonstrate or to work with some of your players, but it's quite basic. If you're working in a school with 30 children delivering a session, my advice is never join in because the potential risk that has, it's not worth it. And years and years and years ago, there was a coach I did know who did join in. It was all innocent. He thought it was to help them develop. But as a result of that, a child was injured and that coach was instantly dismissed from the company. So just keep yourself safe. Integrate, do your interventions, keep on the outside, but don't join in. Okay? If a school or a club specifically ask you to join in, my advice then would be get it agreed, get it in writing, get it so that they are showing that request just to protect you in the event of any incidents occurring. And again, it's about being alert and expect the unexpected. It's not overthinking, it's best preparation. And you're prepared for anything that may come your way in that session. Final couple of slides. Your duty of care is to the participants and those involved. Again, no fault of coaches, APs, anybody working with participants in a session. You sometimes may feel, oh, well, I don't want to stop them. You know, they're doing well. If you're not comfortable with something and you think that it may tip over the edge, or it may harm, but you're worried how they'll respond, my answer is you press that buzzer, you act. So if you feel the weather is getting worse and it's getting colder and the rain's getting heavier, but your children are still active, however you feel that a slip or a trip is imminent, regardless if the children are disappointed, press that buzzer. Because ultimately, if anything did happen, it's you that will be responsible. So don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh, well, they'll be disappointed, I don't want to stop them. If there's anything you're worried about, act. And longer term, you're best doing that. It's not to say adopt the P to K approach, it's spitting everybody in and using it to your advantage. But if you're genuinely worried about something, if it's weather related, if it's equipment related, activity related, somebody earlier on said plan B, press the buzzer and change it. Keep them safe and keep yourself safe and any others involved. Albeit this now refers to the end of a session, I thought I would include it. You've got to pass it on. If anything happens in your session, depending on what environment you're working in, you've got to pass it on. The line of communication, again, back to the earlier slides, know your infrastructures. If you're working in a school, if there's been an injury or incident, you pass it on to the class teacher. That is now keeping yourself safe and keeping them safe. If a child's had a knock to the head, it may not affect them in the first hour from the outside, but from the inside it is. And longer term, that may lead to concussion. They are then not safe after your care. So make sure you pass anything on, no matter how small you think it may be. Pass it on and make sure that the next person taking care of that group, whether it's a parent, a class teacher, a community club worker, tell them. They need to know. And that, again, is best practice. So, to wrap up, guys, thank you so much for attending. I hope you've taken something from it. I am a bit conscious that it is being a lot of myself talking, but for those that have had input, brilliant, and thank you for that. Just to finish off, if we can jump to slido.com again, event number 37387. What have you taken from this webinar and what are you going to action? So I will jump over here. Let's get it going. You can say one thing, three things. You can answer as many times as you like. It can be something you already do, but you've just got more of an awareness of it and you want to do more of it. Anything at all. What have you taken away and what are you going to action? Know the process at your school. Thank you for that. Whoever's shared that. It's always good practice. Get copies of your processes. Know what happens. It may be unlikely a fire alarm goes off. However, if it does, you're covered. You know what to do. You know where to go. So thank you for that. Anything else? It may be something, again, you already do and you're going to do more of it. It may be something that's new to you. More awareness of accident procedures. Keep an eye identifying the type of kids you have. Brilliant. Continuous risk assessment as things can change. Excellent answer. Make sure you know the fire drill and where each class goes. Information on participants. Checking of equipment. Brilliant. Keep them coming. Any more? Last 30 seconds or so. Understanding individual needs. Thank you for that. Medical information on children, excellent. Reinforce government guidelines, brilliant. Keep reinforcing those guidelines. If you're working with children now, you need to keep reaffirming them. Their cleanliness, keeping them well and safe and others around them, excellent point. Ask the school to clean the bibs regularly. Infrastructure awareness, who's who, brilliant. For cleaning bibs, it may be something you've got to take responsibility for. Or it could be the school. When I had a school football team, I used to clean the kits, but it's just something to agree. Accessing accident report forms. If you don't have any, get on the phone to your line manager now after this call and ask for them to email you the PDF. Ask for paper copies if you don't have a printer. Just get them straight away in your file and accessible if you need them. Okay, right then. We will leave it there. Thanks again for attending. I hope you've taken something from it. And if you've got any questions, put it in the box. Other than that, I'll speak to you all again.